The soft scrape of Emma's brush against marble echoed through the East Wing corridor as she worked her way across the same 50-foot section for the third time tonight. Most Omegas would have finished this area an hour ago and moved on, but Emma had learned that appearing slow and thorough kept you invisible, and invisible meant safe. Her hands moved in practiced circles, the motion so automatic she could perform it in her sleep, which was good because her mind was occupied elsewhere, cataloging everything her eyes observed in the empty corridor. At 2:47 a.m., Silver Peak Palace should have been silent, except for the soft footfalls of the night watch. Should have been. Omega. A gruff voice made her flinch. Guard Captain Morris strode past without slowing, his boots clicking against the polished floor. His Majesty will be through on his security walk. Stay out of sight. Yes, sir. Emma's response was automatic, her gaze dropping to the floor in the submissive gesture all Omegas were taught from childhood. She waited until his footsteps faded before allowing herself to breathe normally again. Welcome back, my amazing viewers. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories reach. All right, settle in, take a breath, and let's get back to it. Alpha King Jackson. Thornfield conducted these late-night inspections twice a week, a habit that had kept him alive through 3 assassination attempts in the past 5 years. Emma had been cleaning these corridors for 8 months now, and she'd witnessed his routine enough times to recognize the pattern. He walked the same route, checked the same access points, spoke to the same rotating guards. Predictable. Which, in palace politics, was often fatal. She shifted her position slightly, angling toward the intersection ahead where the East Wing met the North Corridor. Her degree in behavioral psychology, earned through 4 years of night classes she'd hidden from every employer, had taught her to read body language, to spot the micro-expressions and behavioral patterns that most people missed. It was a useless skill for an Omega cleaner, or so she'd thought until 3 months ago when she'd started noticing things about the palace guard rotations that made her skin crawl. Tonight, those alarm bells were screaming. The first guard appeared at 2:51 a.m., taking position near the eastern archway. Nothing unusual there. Guard Davison always covered that post during the king's walks. But Davison's posture was wrong. His shoulders sat too high, tension radiating through his spine in a way that suggested anticipation rather than routine boredom. And he kept glancing toward the North Corridor entrance with the kind of peripheral awareness that spoke of coordinated timing. Emma's hands continued their circular motion, but her breathing had gone shallow. At 2:53, a second guard emerged from the servants' stairwell, taking position near the portrait gallery. Guard Chen, who normally worked the South Wing. His presence here was unusual, but not impossible. Shifts changed, assignments rotated. Except Chen was exhibiting the same elevated tension as Davison. The same synchronized glances toward specific points in the corridor, the same repetitive gesture of adjusting his weapon belt, once every 45 seconds like clockwork. Emma's pulse began to hammer in her throat. The third guard appeared at 2:55, positioning himself near the ornamental fountain that marked the corridor's western end. She didn't recognize this one. A younger Alpha, maybe late 20s, with the kind of nervous energy that manifested in constant micro-movements, checking his watch, straightening his uniform, rolling his shoulders like a fighter preparing to enter the ring. 3 guards, 3 positions, creating a perfect kill box around the intersection where the king would pass in less than 4 minutes. Emma's criminal psychology training crystallized everything into sharp focus. She'd studied ambush tactics, coordination patterns, the behavioral signatures of people preparing to commit violence. These 3 men weren't just tense, they were synchronized. Their glances met and held for split seconds, invisible communication passing between them. Their positioning created overlapping fields of fire with no blind spots. Their body language screamed pre-action anxiety. This wasn't paranoia. This was an assassination attempt in progress. Her hands stilled on the floor. the brush frozen mid-stroke. Every Omega instinct screamed at her to stay quiet, stay invisible, stay safe. Speaking to an Alpha without permission could result in reassignment. Approaching the Alpha King uninvited could mean execution. And if she was wrong, if her psychology degree and her pattern recognition and her gut instinct were all mistaken, she'd be marked as unstable, dangerous, unfit for palace service. But if she was right and said nothing, the king would walk into that kill box in 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Emma's education had cost her everything. 4 years of secret classes, loans she was still repaying, the constant fear of discovery that had aged her beyond her 24 years. She'd earned that degree believing knowledge had value, that truth mattered, that speaking up was worth the risk. Now she had roughly 200 seconds to decide if she actually believed any of that. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the southern corridor, measured, confident. The distinctive cadence of Alpha King Jackson Thornfield's security walk, accompanied by his personal guard detail. 180 seconds. Emma watched the 3 positioned guards tense simultaneously, their hands drifting imperceptibly closer to their weapons. Davison's breathing had accelerated. She could see his chest rising and falling from 30 feet away. Chen had stopped his repetitive belt adjustment, his posture shifting into something coiled and ready. The younger guard near the fountain had gone utterly still, the nervous energy channeled into predatory focus. 120 seconds. Emma's psychology training played out worst-case scenarios in rapid succession. 3 coordinated shooters, overlapping fields of fire. The king's guard detail would react, but not fast enough. Jackson Thornfield would die in this corridor, and the progressive Alpha who'd been slowly, carefully reforming Omega rights would be replaced by someone from the traditional faction. Someone like Beta Commander Ryan Blackwood, who'd made his opinions about Omega coddling very clear in last month's council session that Emma had overheard while cleaning the adjacent room. 60 seconds. The king rounded the corner into view. Even at this distance, even in the dim corridor lighting, he was unmistakable. 6'2" of controlled power, wrapped in formal black attire, dark hair pulled back to reveal features that could have been carved from stone. His amber eyes swept the corridor in their usual pattern, cataloging everything, missing nothing. Except he was missing this. He didn't see what Emma saw. The synchronized tension, the coordinated positioning, the tells of men about to commit murder. 45 seconds. Emma's hands were shaking now, her Omega biology warring with her human consciousness. Every instinct bred into her through generations of hierarchy screamed to stay down, stay quiet, stay invisible. Omegas who challenged Alphas disappeared. Omegas who approached the king without permission were made examples of. Omegas who spoke out of turn were reminded of their place through methods that left scars both visible and hidden. 30 seconds. But Emma thought of her sister Harper, working in the palace kitchens with dreams of something better. She thought of the Omega children born into this rigid hierarchy, taught from infancy that their voices didn't matter, that their insights were worthless, that survival meant silence. She thought of 4 years of night classes and the professor who'd told her that knowledge without action was just expensive entertainment. 20 seconds. Jackson Thornfield walked steadily toward the intersection, his guard detail flanking him in standard formation. They were good, well-trained, alert, professional. But they were watching for external threats, not internal betrayal. They weren't reading the micro-expressions Emma had been studying for 8 months. They didn't see the trap closing around them. 15 seconds. Emma's decision crystallized in a moment of absolute clarity. She could stay quiet and watch a man die, keeping herself safe through silence, or she could risk everything, her job, her safety, possibly her life, on the chance that truth mattered more than survival. Her psychology degree had taught her that people revealed their character in crisis moments, that the choices you made when everything was at stake defined who you actually were, not who you pretended to be. 10 seconds. Emma dropped her brush. The clatter against marble seemed impossibly loud in the quiet corridor, drawing every eye in her direction, including the 3 guards who'd been so carefully maintaining their cover positions. She pushed herself up from her knees, her Omega biology making the movement feel like fighting through concrete, every instinct screaming at her to submit, to lower her eyes, to remember her place. 5 seconds. Jackson Thornfield's amber gaze found hers across the corridor. For one impossible moment, their eyes locked. The Alpha King and the Omega Cleaner, separated by every social barrier their world had constructed. Emma abandoned her cleaning cart. She crossed the corridor in quick, desperate steps that violated a dozen protocols. She could feel the weight of shocked stares, hear the sharp intake of breath from the guard detail, sense the 3 positioned assassins tensing at this unexpected variable in their careful planning. 2 seconds. She reached Jackson Thornfield, close enough now to see the gold flecks in his amber eyes, to smell the winter pine scent that all powerful alphas carried. Close enough to be killed for her presumption. Emma Clark, invisible Omega cleaner with a hidden psychology degree and a fatal inability to stay silent when she saw injustice, opened her mouth and whispered the words that would end her invisible life forever. "Your Majesty, don't move forward. 3 guards. Coordinated. It's an ambush." Emma woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of natural light that never reached the Omega quarters in the palace's lower levels. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then the previous night came rushing back in vivid, terrifying detail. The 3 guards, her desperate warning, the explosion of violence that followed. She'd been right. The ambush had been real. But being right hadn't felt like victory when Guard Davison had drawn his weapon, and Jackson's personal detail had responded with lethal efficiency. Emma had never seen anyone die before. Now she'd seen 2 men killed in less than 30 seconds, their blood spreading across the marble she'd been polishing moments earlier. Jackson had shielded her with his own body during the chaos, one arm locked around her shoulders while he'd barked commands to his remaining guards. Then everything had become a blur of movement, being rushed through service corridors she'd cleaned 100 times, surrounded by grim-faced alphas who looked at her like she was either a miracle or a problem they hadn't decided how to solve yet. She sat up slowly, taking in her surroundings with growing unease. The room was easily 4 times the size of the dormitory she shared with 5 other Omega staff members. Silk sheets, not the rough cotton she was used to. Furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. A balcony overlooking the palace gardens where she'd never been permitted to walk. The door opened without warning, and Emma's Omega instincts kicked in immediately. Eyes down, shoulders curved in submission, hands folded in her lap. The position felt even more unnatural after last night's rebellion, like trying to fit back into clothes she'd outgrown. "You don't have to do that." Jackson Thornfield's voice was quieter than she remembered from the corridor, almost gentle. "Not here. Not with me." Emma's gaze lifted despite herself, finding him standing just inside the doorway. Without the chaos and violence of last night, she could actually look at him properly. He'd changed from his formal attire into simple black clothing that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. The winter pine scent was stronger now, mixed with something darker that made her Omega biology respond in ways she absolutely could not afford to think about. "Your Majesty." Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "I don't understand why I'm here. I should be in the Omega quarters or—" She stopped, realizing the alternative was probably a cell, or worse. Jackson crossed the room with the fluid grace of a predator, stopping at a distance that was respectful but still close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Those amber eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and dissected. "You saved my life last night," he said simply. "How did you know?" The question she'd been dreading. Emma's hands twisted in the silk sheets, her mind racing through possible explanations that wouldn't reveal just how much she'd been observing. how many palace secrets she'd accumulated through 8 months of invisible labor. "I watch people," she said finally. It's something I'm good at." Those 3 guards were coordinated. Their positioning, their body language, the way they kept checking the time and looking at each other. It was textbook ambush formation. Something flickered in Jackson's expression. Curiosity, maybe, or calculation. "Textbook. You've studied tactics?" Emma hesitated, then made a decision that felt simultaneously reckless and inevitable. If she was already in danger, hiding her education wouldn't make it worse. "I have a degree in behavioral psychology, criminal psychology specifically. I know how to read people, how to spot patterns in behavior that indicate planning, coordination, intent to commit violence." The silence that followed stretched long enough to make her nervous. Then Jackson did something unexpected. He smiled. It transformed his severe features into something almost approachable, though the predatory edge never quite disappeared. "A behavioral psychologist working as a palace cleaner. That's either the worst career trajectory I've ever heard of, or deliberate camouflage." "Omegas don't get hired for anything else," Emma said, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. "Doesn't matter what degrees we earn or what skills we have. We're meant to be invisible. Interchangeable. So I learned to be invisible very well." "Until last night." "Until last night," she agreed quietly. Jackson moved to the window, gazing out at the gardens below. "The conspiracy runs deeper than 3 guards, Emma. We captured Guard Chen alive. He's given us names, but not enough. Ryan Blackwood orchestrated this, but he's working with someone outside the palace, someone with resources and reach." He turned back to face her, his expression grave. "And now you're a target. Everyone involved knows you identified their ambush. They know you have skills that make you dangerous to their operation." The fear Emma had been suppressing since waking surged through her chest. "I just want to go back to my normal life. I won't say anything about what I saw. "There is no going back." Jackson's voice was firm, but not unkind. "You think they'll let you live knowing what you can do? Knowing that you might identify more of their people, more of their plans? You're either under my protection or you're dead within a week." The blunt assessment hit like a physical blow. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm sunlight. "So I'm a prisoner." "You're protected. There's a difference." The door opened again, and a woman entered without knocking, tall, sharp-featured, with the kind of predatory alertness that marked her as dangerous even before Emma noticed the weapons she carried with casual ease. Her dark eyes swept over Emma with clinical assessment, and her expression suggested she'd found the Omega cleaner wanting. "Madeline Pierce," Jackson said by way of introduction. "My head of security. Madeline, this is Emma Clark." "The Omega who saved your life." Madeline's tone made it sound more like an accusation than a compliment. "Your Majesty, with respect, keeping her here in the royal wing is a security nightmare. We don't know who she's been talking to, who might have cultivated her as an asset, whether—" "She identified a coordinated assassination attempt that we missed," Jackson interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made even Madeline pause. "I want her insights on our personnel files, starting with everyone who had duty rotations last night." The head of security's jaw tightened. "You're trusting tactical intelligence to an Omega based on one lucky observation?" "It wasn't luck." Jackson's gaze never left Emma's face. "Was it?" Emma found herself speaking before her Omega instincts could stop her. Guard Davison had elevated cortisol markers, increased breathing rate, repetitive self-soothing gestures. Chen exhibited synchronized micro-expressions with the third guard, suggesting coordinated communication. Their positioning created a classic L-shaped ambush with overlapping fields of fire and no escape routes. That's not luck. That's training and observation. Madeline's expression shifted slightly, skepticism giving way to grudging interest. "You can read all that from watching someone stand in a corridor?" "I've been watching palace guards for 8 months. I know their baseline behaviors, their normal patterns. Deviations are obvious once you know what to look for. Jackson pulled a tablet from the desk drawer, tapping through files before handing it to Emma. These are the personnel records for everyone with Royal Wing access. Tell me what you see. Emma took the tablet with trembling hands, scanning through profile photos and service records. Her psychology training kicked in automatically, analyzing facial expressions, body language, and official photos, the tells that most people dismissed as meaningless. This one. She pointed to a guard she'd seen dozens of times. Marcus Webb. He's exhibiting micro-expressions consistent with chronic stress, tension around the eyes, forced smile that doesn't reach the orbicularis oculi muscles, and his service record shows increasing sick days over the past 3 months, which suggests either genuine illness or he's being pressured by someone, Madeline finished, her skepticism visibly cracking. Webb has family in the Northern Territories. If Connor Steele's people got to them... Check it, Jackson ordered. Then, to Emma, keep going. For the next hour, Emma worked through files while Madeline took notes and Jackson watched with that unsettling intensity. She identified 7 guards showing behavioral red flags, 3 staff members whose patterns suggested external pressure, and 2 administrators whose financial records warranted investigation. By the time they finished, Madeline's hostility had shifted to wary respect, though her eyes still carried warnings Emma couldn't quite decode. Jackson stood, his decision apparently made. Emma Clark, I'm appointing you as my intelligence advisor. You'll have security clearance, access to personnel files, and a direct reporting line to me. Your insights may be what keeps this kingdom from tearing itself apart. Your Majesty, the Alpha Council will never accept, Madeline began. The Alpha Council, Jackson said coldly, just missed an assassination plot in their own palace. They'll accept what I tell them to accept. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. An Omega, advising the Alpha King. It was unheard of, impossible, the kind of thing that got people executed for violating hierarchy. It was also, she realized with dawning certainty, exactly what she'd wanted her entire invisible life, a chance to use her mind, to matter, to be seen. I accept, she whispered. Jackson's smile was dangerous and approving. Welcome to the Golden Cage, Emma. Let's hope we both survive what comes next. The reality of what she'd agreed to hit Emma the moment Jackson and Madeline left. Intelligence advisor to the Alpha King. It sounded prestigious until you remembered that Omegas who stepped above their station didn't just lose their positions. They disappeared. The palace had ways of making examples that ensured other Omegas never got similar ideas. When Jackson returned that evening, Emma was pacing the length of her gilded prison, her decision already made. I can't do this, she said before he'd fully entered the room. Your Majesty, I'm grateful for the protection, but appointing me as your advisor, it's a death sentence, not from your enemies, from every Alpha in this palace who sees an Omega forgetting her place. Jackson closed the door behind him with deliberate care, his amber eyes tracking her agitated movements. You think I don't know what I'm asking of you? I don't think you understand what it means to be Omega, Emma said, frustration overriding caution. You're the Alpha King. People might disagree with you, might plot against you, but they respect your right to power. I'm Omega. I have no rights. The moment I accept this position, every traditional Alpha in the kingdom will see me as a threat to the natural order, and they'll eliminate that threat. The natural order. Jackson's voice had gone cold in a way that made Emma's Omega instincts scream warnings. Tell me, Emma, what's natural about a system that wastes brilliant minds because of biology? What's natural about forcing people into invisibility because they were born Omega? That's not the point. It's exactly the point. He moved closer, and Emma found herself backing up until her spine hit the wall. Not from fear, from something far more dangerous. I was 8 years old when I watched my father execute my mother in the palace courtyard. Want to know her crime? Emma's breath caught. Everyone knew the previous Alpha King had been widowed young, but the circumstances had always been vague, buried under official silence. Her name was Grace, Jackson continued, his voice raw with old pain. She was Omega, my father's mate, the Luna Queen, and it didn't matter. She discovered corruption in his council, alphas embezzling from Omega welfare programs, falsifying reports, letting Omega children starve while they built estates. She reported it to him privately, expecting justice. Instead, he had her tried for insubordination, for daring to question alphas, for forgetting her place. Jackson. His name escaped before Emma could stop it, the formal address abandoned in the face of his anguish. They made me watch, he said quietly. 8 years old, and they made me watch while they executed my mother for telling the truth. My father wanted me to learn that power mattered more than justice, that hierarchy mattered more than love, that silencing Omegas was necessary to maintain order. His eyes met hers, blazing with controlled fury. I learned something different. I learned that a system built on silencing truth is a system that deserves to burn. Emma's throat tightened with unshed tears. She understood now, understood the progressive reforms that had made Jackson enemies among traditional alphas, understood his determination to give her this position despite the danger, understood why he'd shielded her body with his own during the ambush instead of letting his guards handle it. She wanted to help people, Emma whispered. Your mother. She saw injustice and couldn't stay silent. Like someone else I know. Jackson's hand lifted, hovering near her face but not quite touching. I'm not asking you to do this because I need an intelligence advisor, Emma. I'm asking because Omega voices deserve to be heard, because brilliant minds deserve to be used. Because my mother died believing the world would never change, and I refuse to let that be true. The air between them felt charged, electric. Emma could feel the mate bond pulling at her, that primal recognition that happened maybe once in a generation. Her Omega biology was screaming at her to submit, to accept, to lean into the Alpha King's touch and let fate decide. The power imbalance, she started, is real, Jackson acknowledged. I'm not naive enough to pretend otherwise. I'm the Alpha King and you're Omega. But I've seen inside your mind, Emma. I've watched you analyze people with more skill than my entire security team. You're not some helpless Omega who needs rescuing. You're dangerous and brilliant, and exactly what this kingdom needs. His hand finally made contact, cupping her face with unexpected gentleness. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and Emma felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. I feel it too, he murmured. The bond. Tell me you don't feel it. Feeling it doesn't make it right. But Emma's voice had gone breathy, her body betraying her even as her mind fought for control. You're the Alpha King. I'm a cleaner. We can't what? Jackson leaned closer, his scent overwhelming her senses. Can't acknowledge what we both know is true? Can't act on a bond that happens once in a lifetime? Can't challenge a system that says alphas and omegas are too different to be equals? Jackson. He kissed her, or she kissed him. Later, Emma wouldn't be sure who closed the final distance, only that his mouth was on hers and everything else ceased to matter. The kiss was desperate, forbidden, perfect, his hand tangling in her silver blonde hair while her fingers clutched at his shoulders, trying to pull him closer despite every social barrier between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jackson pressed his forehead to hers. Stay, he whispered. Accept the position. Help me change this broken system. Let me... The door burst open without warning. Madeline stood in the doorway, her expression urgent and carefully neutral despite what she'd clearly just witnessed. Your Majesty, we have a problem. Ryan Blackwood was spotted near the Omega quarters 20 minutes ago. He met with someone, but they dispersed before we could identify them. And Emma... Madeline's gaze shifted to her, something like sympathy flickering across her features. Your sister Harper, She's missing. Harper had been found within 2 hours. Confused and unharmed in a storage room she claimed to have entered voluntarily. But the message was clear. Ryan could reach Emma's sister whenever he wanted. The invisible threat hung over everything that followed. Emma returned to her cleaning duties the next day, though now she moved through the palace with a different purpose. Her cart rattled along the same marble corridors, her hands performed the same practiced motions, but her mind catalogued everything with clinical precision. Guards who lingered too long in restricted areas, kitchen staff whose movements deviated from routine, administrators whose micro-expressions suggested divided loyalties. At night, she became someone else entirely, analyzing personnel files in Jackson's private study, profiling suspects, translating behavioral patterns into actionable intelligence. The duality was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. "This one," she said 3 days into her new role, pointing to a file on Jackson's tablet. "Service Coordinator Marcus Webb. His stress markers have intensified. Look at the security footage from yesterday. He's exhibiting classic signs of someone under extreme external pressure." Madeline pulled Webb in for questioning that afternoon. Within an hour, they'd uncovered a plot to poison Jackson's evening meal. Webb had been coerced through threats to his daughter in Northern Pack territory. He'd been sobbing with relief when he confessed, grateful to finally tell someone the truth. Jackson promoted Emma's security clearance that same evening. "Connor Steele," he said, pulling up diplomatic footage on the study's large display. "Northern Pack Alpha. He's been probing our borders for months, testing response times and defensive positions. I need to know what kind of threat we're dealing with." Emma studied the footage with the same intensity she'd once reserved for academic papers. Connor Steele was older than Jackson by perhaps a decade, with the kind of calculated charm that masked something colder underneath. She watched him negotiate trade agreements, host diplomatic dinners, address his own pack council. "He's a strategist," she said finally. "Every gesture is calculated for maximum effect. See how he mirrors the body language of whoever he's talking to? That's advanced manipulation technique, creating false rapport to lower defenses. And here," she paused the footage, "when he thinks no one's watching, his expression goes completely neutral. No emotion, just calculation. He's not driven by passion or ideology. He's an expansionist who sees your reforms as weakness, and he'll exploit any perceived vulnerability until he finds an opening." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Then we make sure he doesn't find one." The attack came 2 days later, swift and brutal. Emma had requested permission to visit Harper in the kitchen courtyard, needing to see her sister with her own eyes after the storage room incident. Jackson had agreed but insisted on covert security, a decision that saved both their lives. 3 of Ryan's operatives emerged from the service entrance as Emma embraced Harper, their intent written in coordinated movement and drawn weapons. Emma's scream was cut short by the explosive intervention of Jackson's hidden team. The violence was surgical and terrifying, suppressors reducing gunfire to harsh coughs, bodies dropping before Emma's mind could fully process what was happening. Jackson materialized from nowhere, his arms around her as Harper screamed and security bundled her to safety. The Alpha King's winter pine scent was corrupted by cordite and violence, his carefully controlled power unleashed in ways that should have terrified Emma. Instead, she found herself clinging to him, her psychology training cataloging the necessity of the response, even as her Omega biology processed the protective fury radiating from his frame. "I'm sorry," he said later, after Harper had been secured and the bodies removed, and Emma sat shaking in his study with brandy she couldn't taste. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Sorry that loving me means living with this violence." "Loving you?" Emma's voice was steadier than she expected. "You're very confident about my feelings, Your Majesty." Jackson knelt before her chair, his amber eyes level with hers. "I love you, Emma Clark. I've loved you since you risked everything to whisper a warning to an alpha who might not have believed you. I love your brilliant mind and your terrible timing, and your complete inability to stay silent when silence would keep you safe. And I know this is impossible and dangerous and probably the worst decision either of us could make. But I'm done pretending the bond doesn't exist." Emma set down the brandy with trembling hands. "The power imbalance is still real. You're still the Alpha King. I'm still Omega. None of that has changed." "No," Jackson agreed. "But you're choosing this, not because I'm ordering you, not because Omega biology compels you. You're choosing, freely, to be here. That's the difference." It was. Emma realized he was right. She'd had a dozen opportunities to walk away, to request reassignment, to hide behind protocols and hierarchy. She'd stayed because she wanted to, because the bond was real and undeniable, because Jackson saw her as an equal in ways no Alpha ever had. She kissed him first this time, decisive and certain. What followed was inevitable and perfect and terrifying. Two people choosing each other despite every reason they shouldn't, the mate bond finally acknowledged and consummated in the darkness of his private quarters. Later, wrapped in silk sheets with Jackson's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Emma accepted the truth she'd been avoiding. She'd chosen this dangerous path freely, and she wouldn't trade it for all the safe invisibility in the world. Emma found the execution order buried in classified security files she'd been granted access to review. Omega made Chloe Bennett, age 23, terminated for treason against the Crown. The clinical language didn't hide what it meant. Jackson had ordered someone killed. An Omega. Someone like Emma. Her hands shook as she pulled up Chloe's personnel file. A face looked back at her from the screen. Young, scared, with the same careful invisibility Emma recognized in every Omega who'd learned to survive through silence. According to the record, Chloe had been caught passing security rotation schedules to Ryan Blackwood's network. The evidence was clear, the punishment swift, but Emma's psychology training wouldn't let her stop there. She dug deeper, pulling surveillance footage, communication logs, background checks. And there it was, buried in financial records and intercepted messages, proof that Chloe's elderly parents lived in Northern Pac territory, proof of threats made against them, proof that Chloe hadn't been a willing traitor but a terrified daughter trying to save her family. Jackson had killed a victim and called it justice. Emma was waiting in his study when he returned from a council meeting, the files displayed across every screen like an indictment. "Tell me you didn't know," she said without preamble. "Tell me you didn't know she was being coerced." Jackson's expression shifted as he took in the evidence, something like resignation settling over his features. "I knew." The admission hit like a physical blow. Emma had been desperately hoping for ignorance, for some explanation that would make this bearable. "You knew she was a victim, and you killed her anyway?" "She compromised security rotations that led to 2 guards' deaths in the first assassination attempt," Jackson said, his voice carefully neutral. "Her information, willing or coerced, enabled Ryan's operatives to position themselves exactly where they needed to be. Those guards had families too, Emma. Children who'll grow up without fathers because Chloe Bennett chose her parents over her duty." "Chose?" Emma's voice rose despite herself. "She was an Omega being threatened by Alphas. What choice did she have? You're the one always talking about how Omegas deserve to be heard, deserve protection, deserve justice, and then you execute one for trying to save her family? This isn't an academic exercise in criminal psychology." Jackson's calm was cracking, anger bleeding through. "This is survival. Every day I make decisions where someone dies. Every choice has consequences. I can show mercy to one Omega whose coercion I sympathize with, and then what? Every enemy we have learns that threatening Omega families is an effective strategy. More Omegas get targeted, more families get leveraged, the violence spreads." "So, your solution is to kill the victims?" Emma was shaking now, her moral foundation crumbling beneath the weight of his pragmatism. "To prove that threatening Omegas won't work by executing the Omegas who were threatened? Can't you hear how insane that sounds?" "I hear how it sounds in a philosophy classroom," Jackson shot back. "But we're not in a classroom, Emma. We're in a palace where people are actively trying to kill me, where conspiracies run deep enough to corrupt my own guards, where showing weakness gets exploited until everyone I'm trying to protect ends up dead. There's survival, and there's death. Those are the only options. Then maybe I don't want to survive in your world. The words escaped before Emma could stop them, raw and honest and devastating. The silence that followed felt like a chasm opening between them. Jackson's expression shuddered, the Alpha King replacing the man who'd whispered love confessions against her skin just days ago. "Chloe Bennett's parents are alive," he said quietly. The information she provided was used in the attack that killed guards Morrison and Chen. If I'd shown mercy, if I'd made her coercion an acceptable excuse, how many more Omega families would Ryan target? How many more scared daughters would be forced to choose between parents and duty? I made an example because examples are the only language these people understand. You made an example out of someone who was victimized twice, once by Ryan's threats, once by your execution, and you're asking me to accept that as justice? Emma's voice broke. You're asking me to be your intelligence advisor, to help you make these decisions, to become complicit in this calculated brutality? I'm asking you to understand that protecting the many sometimes requires sacrificing the few. That's what ruling means, Emma. That's what keeping people safe actually looks like when you remove the academic theory and face the reality. Emma stared at the man she loved, seeing clearly for the first time the chasm between them. He was right. She'd been living in theory, in the clean moral frameworks of her psychology degree. But theory didn't account for the weight of impossible choices, for the mathematics of lives balanced against lives. It also didn't make his choice right. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't be part of a system that punishes victims. I can't love someone who thinks executing scared Omegas is an acceptable cost of ruling. I can't—" Her voice failed entirely. "Emma, I need to leave. Now. Before I become so complicit in this that I forget why it's wrong." She was packed within an hour, her few possessions fitting easily into a single bag. Jackson didn't try to stop her, though Madeline appeared to coordinate safe transport to Millbrook, where Harper had been temporarily reassigned after the courtyard attack. The border town was small, quiet, blessedly normal. Harper held Emma while she cried, asked no questions, simply let her sister process the grief of loving someone whose world required brutality she couldn't accept. But normal felt wrong now. Every quiet night reminded Emma of palace corridors and brilliant conversations. Every peaceful moment made her wonder what attacks Jackson was facing without her insights. Every moral certainty she'd fled to protect felt increasingly hollow against the memory of his anguished voice explaining impossible choices. She'd chosen truth over complicity, so why did it feel like she'd chosen cowardice over love? 3 weeks of quiet in Millbrook felt like a lifetime and an instant simultaneously. Emma had found work at a local diner, her psychology degree once again hidden beneath menial labor. Harper worked the morning shift at a bakery, both sisters pretending they could build normal lives from the wreckage of palace intrigue. Then Harper didn't come home from the market. Emma's panic was immediate and visceral, her mind cataloging every terrible possibility with clinical precision, even as her hands shook dialing Harper's phone. No answer. She ran to the market, finding Harper's shopping basket abandoned near the vegetable stalls, its contents scattered across cobblestones like evidence of struggle. The message arrived an hour later, a video file from an unknown number that made Emma's blood turn to ice. Connor Steele's face filled the screen, his calculated charm replaced by cold pragmatism. Behind him, barely visible in dim lighting, Harper sat bound to a chair, terrified but apparently unharmed. "Emma Clark." Connor's voice was almost pleasant. "Your sister is comfortable in my fortress, and she'll remain that way provided you follow instructions precisely. Alpha King Jackson will publicly abdicate within 72 hours, citing personal reasons. You will never speak of the conspiracy against him, never testify about what you witnessed, never use your psychological insights against my interests. Do this, and Harper goes home unharmed. Refuse, and, he smiled, well, Ryan Blackwood sends his regards. He provided very detailed intelligence about your sister's routines. It would be a shame if that information proved fatal. The video ended. Emma played it 3 more times, her psychology training analyzing every frame, even as her heart shattered. Harper was alive. That was all that mattered. Her hands were still shaking when she dialed Jackson's private number, the one he'd made her memorize before she'd fled. He answered on the first ring. Emma. Just her name, but she heard everything in it, relief and pain and desperate hope. She didn't have time for any of it. Connor Steele has Harper. He wants you to abdicate. I need... Her voice broke. I need help. Please. I'm already moving. She could hear orders being barked in the background, the controlled chaos of military mobilization. Send me the video. Don't go anywhere alone. I'll be there in 2 hours. He made it in 90 minutes. Emma watched from the tiny apartment window as the convoy arrived, armored vehicles that looked absurdly out of place on Millbrook's quiet streets. Then Jackson was there, filling her doorway with barely contained fury, and that winter pine scent that still made her Omega biology sing despite everything. Madeline was with him, already reviewing the video on tactical displays spread across Emma's small kitchen table. Connor's Fortress, the head of security confirmed. Northern border, heavily fortified. This isn't random. Ryan's been feeding him intelligence for months. Chloe Bennett, Jackson said quietly, his amber eyes finding Emma's. The information she provided before her execution detailed Harper's schedule, her vulnerabilities, her routines in the palace kitchens. Connor was planning this kidnapping 3 months ago. I stopped it by eliminating his intelligence source. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Emma sank into a chair, her moral certainty collapsing beneath the weight of impossible mathematics. Jackson had killed Chloe to save Harper. The execution Emma had condemned had been the only thing standing between her sister and this exact scenario. You never told me, she whispered. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was justifying murder with convenient hypotheticals? Jackson's voice held no accusation, only weary resignation. I made the choice I could live with. You made the choice you could live with. Now Harper's paying the price for both our decisions. Emma looked at her sister's face frozen on the tactical display, terrified, bound, trapped because Emma had chosen moral purity over pragmatic protection, because she'd fled instead of staying to understand the full context of Jackson's impossible choices. Tell me what you need, she said, her voice steady, despite the tears tracking down her face. Tell me how to get her back. Your psychological analysis. Madeline pulled up files on Connor's known associates, his Fortress command structure, intercepted communications from Northern Pack channels. We need to know who's loyal, who's coerced, who we can turn. We need to understand Connor's thinking, predict his responses, identify vulnerabilities in his operation. Emma wiped her eyes and leaned forward, her brilliant mind engaging despite her breaking heart. She studied faces, analyzed body language from surveillance footage, profiled command hierarchies with the same intensity she'd once used to identify palace conspirators. These 3 guards, she said, pointing to specific individuals. They're exhibiting stress markers consistent with coercion. See the micro-expressions when Connor's in frame? They're afraid of him. Target them for turning, and here, Connor's second in command. He's displaying contempt markers when Connor isn't watching. There's friction in the leadership structure we can exploit. They worked through the night, Emma translating behavioral patterns into tactical intelligence, while Jackson and Madeline built an assault plan around her insights. By dawn, they had a strategy that might actually work. I'm coming with you, Emma said when Jackson tried to argue for her staying behind. I can use my Omega status. Infiltrate as a gift, Omega. Get inside the fortress, locate Harper while your team breaches the walls. Absolutely not, Jackson said flatly. It's the only approach that makes tactical sense. Emma met his gaze steadily. Connor's expecting a frontal assault. He's not expecting an Omega to be part of your team. I'm your best chance of getting Harper out alive." The look Jackson gave her held everything they hadn't said, love and fear and desperate pride. "If anything happens to you, then you'll burn his fortress to the ground," Emma finished. "I know. Now let's go save my sister." The fortress loomed against the night sky like a monument to alpha dominance, all stone and steel and brutal functionality. Emma approached the gates alone, dressed in the plain clothing of an Omega being transferred between packs, her hands bound loosely enough that she could slip free when needed. The guards who processed her barely looked at her face. Omegas were interchangeable to men like these, just another piece of property being relocated. They searched her perfunctorily, found nothing threatening, and escorted her toward the Omega holding area in the fortress's lower levels. Emma cataloged everything: guard positions, patrol patterns, the micro-expressions that separated true believers from men who'd been coerced into service. The 3 guards she'd identified in her analysis were exactly where predicted, their discomfort with Connor's methods written in nervous glances and tense shoulders. "You're new," one of them said as they reached the holding cells. His name tag read Williams, and his eyes held the kind of exhaustion Emma recognized from her psychology work, moral injury from following orders that violated his conscience. "Gift from Alpha Steel's Southern contacts," Emma lied smoothly. "Supposed to be a bargaining chip." Williams's expression flickered with something like sympathy before shuddering back to professional neutrality. But it was enough. When the explosion started 40 minutes later, Jackson's team breaching the north wall exactly on schedule, Williams made a choice. He unlocked Emma's cell instead of securing it, his hands shaking as he pressed keys into her palm. "Third corridor, end of the hall," he whispered. "There's an Omega girl, brown hair, brought in 3 weeks ago. Get her out through the service tunnels. I'm done being part of this." Emma ran, her heart pounding as chaos erupted overhead. The fortress shook with concussive force, alarms shrieking, boots thundering through stone corridors. She found Harper exactly where Williams indicated, her sister's face transforming from terror to disbelief to desperate relief in the space of a heartbeat. "Emma? How?" "Later. Move." Emma unlocked the cell, grabbed Harper's hand, and pulled her toward the service tunnels Williams had indicated. They were halfway through the underground passages when Emma heard it, Jackson's voice, amplified and carrying through the fortress with unmistakable authority. "Ryan Blackwood, I challenge you to ritual combat. Face me or be marked coward before both packs." Emma froze, torn between getting Harper to safety and witnessing what she knew was about to happen. Harper seemed to sense it, squeezing her hand. "Go," her sister said. "I'll follow the tunnel out. You need to see this." Emma shouldn't have. Every tactical consideration said to complete the extraction and escape. But she climbed the maintenance ladder anyway, emerging in a concealed alcove overlooking the fortress's main hall, where 2 packs had assembled in the ancient formation required for ritual combat. Jackson stood in the center, blood already streaking his face from the breach assault, his amber eyes locked on Ryan Blackwood across the ceremonial circle. Connor Steele watched from the raised platform, his expression calculating, waiting. "You're destroying everything our ancestors built," Ryan said, his voice carrying to every witness. "Your reforms make us weak. Giving Omegas power, questioning hierarchy, it's not progress, Jackson. It's suicide for pack strength." "My mother was Omega," Jackson replied quietly. "She was brilliant and brave, and they killed her for speaking truth. You think that made us stronger? You think silencing half our population's insights makes us anything but blind?" Ryan's response was to attack, the ritual combat beginning with explosive violence. No weapons, no mercy, just 2 alphas and years of friendship turned to betrayal, fueling every blow. The fight was brutal and intimate, each knowing the other's techniques, each exploiting weaknesses learned through decades of shared history. Emma watched Jackson take hits that would have felled lesser alphas, watched him deliver punishment with surgical precision, watched the moment Ryan's strength began to fail. The final blow was almost gentle, Jackson's hand around Ryan's throat, their faces inches apart. "I'm sorry it ended this way, brother," Jackson whispered. Then he snapped Ryan's neck with controlled finality. The body hadn't hit the ground before Connor Steele descended from the platform, his calculated charm replaced by predatory intent. Weakened and bleeding. Convenient timing. The crowd murmured. This was technically legal, challenging immediately after ritual combat, but it was considered cowardly. Connor clearly didn't care about honor, only opportunity. Jackson turned to face him, exhaustion written in every line of his body, but his eyes still burning with controlled fury. They began to circle, and Emma's psychology training cataloged what she was seeing. Connor was fresh, strategic, waiting for Jackson's injuries to slow him down. And there, in the way Connor kept his left shoulder slightly back, the way he consistently turned to present his right side. "Left blind spot!" Emma shouted from her concealment, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "He's compensating for limited peripheral vision left side." Jackson's gaze flicked to her hiding spot for a split second, acknowledgement and love and desperation flashing across his features. Then he moved, feinting right before attacking left. Connor's compensation was exactly as Emma predicted, a fraction of a second too slow turning into the threat. Jackson's claws found Connor's throat, the northern pack. Alpha died still wearing his calculated expression, surprise not registering until his body collapsed. The fortress fell silent except for Emma's ragged breathing. Jackson stood over two bodies, his chest heaving, blood dripping from a dozen wounds. His amber eyes found hers across the hall. "Get Harper and get out," he said, his voice carrying command even in exhaustion. "Madeline will—" "No!" Emma emerged from concealment, climbing down to the main hall despite the shocked stares of two packs. She crossed to Jackson, her Omega biology screaming warnings about approaching a blood-soaked alpha, her heart overriding every instinct. "I'm staying. Harper's safe, the conspiracy's ended, and I'm done running from impossible choices." She reached Jackson, her hand finding his bloodied face with impossible gentleness. "You were right. There's survival and there's death. I choose survival. I choose you. For better and worse, I'm choosing this world." Jackson's arms came around her, heedless of witnesses, heedless of protocol. "Welcome home," he whispered against her hair. Emma held him while two packs watched their Alpha King embrace an Omega cleaner who'd saved his life twice, first with a whispered warning, then with brilliant insight that turned the tide of combat. She was irrevocably part of his world now, and she'd make every choice again. The morning sun cast gold across Silver Peak Palace as Emma stood before the intelligence office's new recruits, her hand resting unconsciously on her swollen belly. 6 months pregnant with a daughter they'd already named Grace, and she was still conducting training sessions that most advisors insisted she delegate. "Behavioral analysis isn't about judging people," she told the assembled analysts, a mix of alphas, betas, and, for the first time in Kingdom history, 3 Omegas who'd scored highest on the aptitude assessments. "It's about understanding patterns, recognizing stress markers, identifying when someone's actions don't match their baseline behavior. You're not here to condemn. You're here to protect." Harper caught her eye from the back of the room, her sister's smile proud and slightly amused. 2 years ago, Harper had been a terrified kitchen worker. Now she served as Emma's assistant and had become frighteningly good at threat assessment, her own trauma from Connor's fortress channeled into ensuring others never faced similar situations. The training session ended with assignments, and Emma retreated to her office, larger than the dormitory she'd once shared with 5 other Omegas, filled with tactical displays and personnel files and the accumulated weight of impossible decisions. Madeline was waiting, her expression carefully neutral in the way that meant complicated news. "The operation in the Eastern Territories was successful," the head of security said without preamble. 3 conspirators eliminated, minimal collateral damage. But there was a civilian caught in the crossfire, an Omega who'd been coerced into providing safe house access. Emma's chest tightened with familiar pain. 2 years of this work, and it never got easier. Family status? 2 children, now orphaned. I've already authorized full support payments and educational provisions. Not enough, Emma said quietly. Never enough. But it's what we can do. She'd authorized the operation knowing the risks, understanding that perfect outcomes were fantasy. The conspirators had been planning an attack on the Omega Council chambers, the very institution Emma had fought to create. Stopping them had required ruthless action. The cost was a woman who'd been victimized twice, just like Chloe Bennett, just like Emma had sworn would never happen again. The system we're building, Emma said, meeting Madeline's gaze, requires us to make choices that haunt us, but it's still better than the system that came before. Spoken like a true queen, Madeline said with something approaching respect. She'd been skeptical of the Omega Cleaner 2 years ago. Now she was Emma's most trusted strategic partner. After Madeline left, Emma pulled up a particular file she accessed every month. Chloe Bennett's parents, now living in a comfortable cottage on palace grounds. Emma visited them personally, ensuring they had everything they needed, listening to stories about the daughter who'd been caught in an impossible situation and paid with her life. She never told them she'd condemned Jackson for Chloe's execution, never mentioned her own flight from moral complexity. She simply ensured they were cared for, a private penance Jackson never questioned but understood completely. The Omega Council had been Emma's first major reform, giving Omega voices formal power in governance, creating legal protections against the kind of coercion that had destroyed Chloe. The traditionalists had fought viciously, but Jackson had backed Emma's vision with absolute authority. Now, Omegas sat on advisory boards, served in intelligence roles, spoke in council chambers without fear of execution for insubordination. It wasn't perfect. The system still carried centuries of hierarchy, still had alphas who resented change, still required constant vigilance against those who'd exploit any weakness. But it was progress measured in lives saved and voices heard. Emma found Jackson on their private balcony as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and gold. He looked up from reviewing reports, his expression softening in the way it only did for her. "You should be resting," he said, pulling her against his chest with careful reverence for her pregnant belly. "I've been resting for 6 months according to everyone except me." Emma leaned into his warmth, his winter pine scent as familiar now as her own heartbeat. "How was the council session?" "Exhausting. Lord Hartford is still protesting Omega representation. I reminded him that my Luna Queen's intelligence prevented 4 major attacks this year and suggested he reconsider his position." Emma smiled against his shoulder. "Diplomatic, as always. I learned from the best." Jackson's hand covered hers on her belly, their daughter moving beneath their joined palms. "Grace is active today. Takes after her father, constantly fighting something." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the kingdom spread below them. Silver Peak had changed in 2 years, the transformation subtle but undeniable. Omegas walked palace corridors with less fear. Intelligence flowed from sources previously silenced. The rigid hierarchy was cracking, slowly, under the combined pressure of Jackson's authority and Emma's relentless strategic vision. "Do you regret it?" Jackson asked quietly. "The choices we've had to make? The operations that went wrong? The people who died? The compromises with our principles?" Emma thought of Chloe Bennett's parents and the orphaned children from the Eastern Territories and the dozens of other costs their protection had required. She thought of the Omega Council and the reformed intelligence service and Harper's proud smile during training sessions. She thought of her journey from Invisible Cleaner to Luna Queen, from moral certainty to complex understanding. "I chose truth over silence when I warned you about the ambush," she said finally. I chose love over safety when I came back after Harper's kidnapping. I chose power over purity when I accepted that protecting people sometimes requires ruthless action. And I'd make every choice again, Jackson. Every single one. His arms tightened around her, his face pressed against her silver blonde hair. Even the ones that haunt you? Especially those. Because the alternative is returning to invisibility, to silence, to a world where Omegas are property and speaking truth gets you executed. Emma turned in his arms, her amber-flecked gray eyes meeting his amber gaze. Your mother, Grace, died believing the world wouldn't change. Our daughter, Grace, will grow up in a kingdom where Omega voices matter. That's worth every impossible choice, every moral compromise, every decision that keeps me awake at night. Jackson kissed her, gentle and reverent, as the sun set over Silver Peak and their daughter kicked beneath their joined hands. I love you, Luna Queen, he whispered. I love you, Alpha King, Emma replied. Now and always, for better and worse. They stood together on the balcony, two people who'd chosen each other despite impossible odds, watching the sunrise of a kingdom slowly transforming into something better than what came before. Imperfect, complicated, hard-won, but worth fighting for. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments what you think about this story and where you're watching from. Your support means a lot and helps us keep creating more stories like this. Until next time, stay safe, stay inspired.